Supergirl, the international cut, which I watched on Blu-ray, was an interesting experience. I knew that watching this one was going to be rough because the last time I had watched it about 15 or so years ago, I didn't even add it to my collection. Actually, no, the last time I'd watched it would have been closer to 20 to 25 years ago. My gosh, long time. And even then, I watched the director's cut and was like, ugh, this is cringy. This is really difficult to watch. So, but it was part of, I mean, both the Christopher Reeve Superman and the Helen Slater Supergirl have brief cameos in the Flash movie. And so part of my mentality was, well, let's revisit all these so I can appreciate as best as I possibly could their appearance when I get around to watching the Flash movie again. So watching this one, it was interesting. You know, one thing similar to the "and one day your heirs" misunderstanding of the Zod line in Superman 1, there was always a line of Kara's in this movie that I never understood until maybe this time that I watched it. No. I think I understood it when I watched it as an adult 20 years ago or whatever. But anyway, when the high school superintendent says to her, who on earth are you? She says, on earth I'm Lee, Linda Lee. And the way that she says it, it sounded like gibberish to me as a kid. It sounded like she was saying Honor Thom Lee. What the heck? Honor Thom? Why would you Honor Thom Lee? And then she switches over to Linda Lee. So it's just these weird things that, like, I'm sure you guys have all had something like that, where like as a kid, you had this weird understanding of something. And then later on when you revisit it, you're like, oh. So anyway, Helen Slater as Honor Thom Lee in this movie was not helped at all by the script. There is just some incoherent dialogue and illogical conversations, illogical understandings of physics and human psychology. Multiple times where I'm like, why are you saying this? Based on what was just said earlier in this conversation, why are you saying this right now? I feel like, well, this is what I felt like watching the movie. There's actually an explanation for the problems with the script that made me much more charitable to this movie once I found this out. But it felt like there was a lot of cool, or what they thought were cool, ideas that are just kind of forcibly strung together. Like, why is the witch lady and her sidekick, why are they living in an amusement park, like a carnival? They're living in a carnival. Her house is like a rebuilt carnival ride. Like a ghost, like a haunted house carnival ride. She's rebuilt it and made it into a house. And I'm like, why is she living here? I understand aesthetically why it kind of fits the environment of a witch lady, but that's a really weird choice for anybody to make. Just little things like that. I'm like, this is weird. Why are we doing this? And so and the whole story and script feels like that. Like in some writer's room, there was, we should have this somewhere in the movie. We should have this somewhere in the movie. And they had all these ideas, and then they just forced them somehow to be connected together into a single movie, but without really justifying them. I found it interesting, though, going back to this movie, that the main character is a witch, and they played it. I mean, when I listened to the commentary, which I just had to after watching this, I was like, I need to understand what was going on. What were you thinking? And I think this was the first time I'd ever listened to the commentary for this. But they didn't dip into real world witchcraft or what, we would understand today to be like Wicca. They didn't dip into that really. They fictionalized their version of witchcraft quite a bit, but it still had enough of those kind of modern actual witchcraft sensibilities that it just made me wonder how this movie would play today, how it would be received, if the Wiccan community would be upset and outraged at this kind of representation, quote unquote. This is one of many choices that I was seeing in these movies, and I'm like, I don't think this choice would be made today, and this movie would not play to us today like it did back then. But I did like the idea of pitting a Kryptonian against magic instead of kryptonite. You have to figure out what are you going to do to a Kryptonian at this point, especially when back in this time in the comics and in the movies we certainly saw, Superman was pretty much unstoppable by anything except for kryptonite. And like the limits of his abilities were kind of bonkers. In Superman 4, he does push the moon into a different spot in orbit in order to save the day. So, I mean, like, what he could do was kind of crazy. So they would have to do something like this, or use kryptonite or another Kryptonian again to create some conflict. So I think it was a good time to say, okay, let's introduce magic, because classically Superman, that's the one other thing that he is weak to, is magic. So I like that choice. And there's also a weird way in which magic is blended with sci-fi, as Supergirl in this story is trying to reacquire this object called the Omega Hedron, which is one of two major power sources for Argo City, a sort of satellite city of Krypton that survived Krypton's destruction by retreating into inner space. Whatever that means, but they kind of went to a different dimension in order to preserve the remaining Kryptonians there. But anyway, their power sources are very limited, so losing this power source would mean that all of Argo City and its inhabitants would die, so she needs to go and recover this. While the witch is using this to power her magic, to enhance her magic, which I thought was really interesting. Was that saying that magic in this film world is just a complicated version of science? I don't think necessarily. I don't think it was really that thought out at all. And I do tend to like, ever since the Final Fantasy games, having this mashup of sci-fi and fantasy, and seeing that represented here, I found kind of interesting to come back to. Let's see here. In the director's commentary, this was what really made me sympathetic. It didn't help me enjoy the movie anymore. I doubt I'll ever watch this movie again. It was neat to have it in my collection, to be able to listen to the director's commentary, just from a superhero nerd film history standpoint. So I'm not going to watch the movie again, but I felt more sympathetic toward the making of it when I heard this in the commentary. Christopher Reeve was, and I knew he was originally going to be part of this movie and then, bowed out. What I didn't know was how late in the process Christopher Reeve bowed out. He bowed out very close to when they started filming. And so he was going to be a major part of the story. He was going to be welcoming Kara when she first came into the world. The first scene of her learning how to fly was going to be with Christopher Reeve. And then in the story, Christopher Reeve's Superman character was going to be in big trouble and was going to need rescuing. And so he was going to be a part of the climax. And so he was going to be a major part of this movie. And so him suddenly exiting meant that they had to scramble to re-stitch together this script. Now, it doesn't explain why the witch is living in a carnival ride, but there were some other things that I was like, okay, maybe I can understand some of these things being thrown in as ideas that they just needed to fill out the story and to just try to make it interesting without Superman being in the story. So either way, there were actually many rewrites of the script I learned during watching the commentary, but the Christopher Reeve departure was the rewrite trigger that had the largest impact on the script as a whole. So I found that very interesting to learn about. So anyway, Supergirl, the international cut, it was an interesting thing to revisit just on a meta level, but it was probably the hardest of all of these movies to give time to watching. Because in the I will say this, the wire flying was still really beautiful, still really nice. They played up as was the intention, the grace of Supergirl compared to the power and just kind of direct approach of Superman and everything that he did. And so I appreciated what they did with the wire flying, but it still just felt like it was testing my patience a bit to just see how extended of a sequence she was when she was gracefully doing air ballet around. It looked really nice. But it would have been so much cooler with Superman. And to realize, oh, okay, this was supposed to be a whole sequence with her and Superman. I can see why I felt like my patience was being tested a little bit. Anyway, that's Supergirl, the international cut.